Welcome to the Hoops Habit Hangout. This is our 19th show, allegedly. I think there's a couple of hidden shows down in the vault that nobody else gets to see, but we'll release those as B-sides someday. My name is Michael Dunlap, and I am the founder and editor-in-chief here at HoopsHabit.com. With us, as always, is Phil.
How you doing?
Phil, what do you do?
Oh, this is the intro part. My name's Phil Watson. I'm the editor of Daily Express on the fan-sided network. I'm also the assistant editor at Hoops Habit. I don't have my own region. I'm just kind of a normal assistant editor. And I picked up a new title I won't get into yet, but it's another role with fan-sided. And I do dabble in a little local radio.
Nice. And Gerald Bourget?
Yeah, I'm Gerald, and I'm the assistant to the regional editor at Hoops Habit, and also a co-host of a radio show that you've probably never heard of called Bras, Panties, and Sports.
You have a much better title than mine. Mine is Watson and Whitburn on sports. But the guy that runs the radio station's about 82 years old, and the last new idea he had came while he was driving a car that had the big fins on the back. So.
Let me help you out with a money title. Watson, Whitbourne, and Weak Sauce. You just spice it right up a little bit. Our special guest, he is a San Antonio Spurs savant. Aren't you?
If you're going to say that, I'll go with it, but I don't know. I don't think basketball is that difficult a thing to figure out, but I do follow it probably a little bit too closely for my own good health. So but glad to be on the show with you guys.
So we brought you on here to smart it up, and you've just dumbed it down for us. Hey, you've let everyone know that we're not geniuses.
Well, look, man, if you brought me on to smart it up, you might be a little bit disappointed going forward, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes from there.
All right, well, let us get underway. We're going to have our standard setup. I'm going to start with LeBron and his legacy. Shane Young, if you're listening, at some point you're going to watch this, and I want you to know that LeBron isn't trying to catch Kobe. He's trying to catch Jordan or Magic Johnson. Kobe's like off to the side. We'll talk about that in a minute. Through 11 seasons, now obviously we're including this season for LeBron, hasn't won the title just yet. Apparently they've got games to play or something. Kobe Bryant, 3 rings, 1 MVP, no finals MVPs. That's through his first 11 seasons. Michael Jordan had 4 rings at that point, 4 MVPs and 4 finals MVPs. LeBron James is at 2 rings, 4 MVPs, 2 finals MVPs. Now, the reason that I really think that this season is so important to his legacy is twofold. Number one, if he can lead the Heat to the title, win another finals MVP, that brings him into serious consideration as far as, being one of the top 5 best ever to play basketball. If you want to talk about his shortcomings, the fact that he's made some PR issues for himself, that's about it. As far as his basketball is concerned, this is his 4th consecutive finals. He's made the finals 5 out of 11 years. Can Kobe Bryant say that? Can Michael Jordan say that? Well, Jordan could say a lot more than that further into his career, but that's where the twofold comes into play here, because if the Heat win the title this year, puts James at 3 rings, 3-ring circus, sorry, I just, I didn't even need to use the effects. I appreciate that. I think that the Heat stay together to go for that 4th title. Getting a 4th consecutive title in this era is unheard of. That's something that we'll get into later when we talk to Matt. But as far as LeBron and his legacy, if he wins a title this season, oh my goodness. Shane Young tells me that I can't call out greatness, and it was a capital G on the greatness, just so you guys know. Kobe.
God.
So let me ask you guys. And also Magic Johnson I had put into this conversation as well, who I believe LeBron James most closely resembles anyways, Jordan being more of a scorer. Kobe also being more of a scorer, Johnson being kind of a jack of all trades. Johnson had 5 rings, 3 MVPs, and 3 Finals MVPs through 11 seasons, and then of course, as we all know, his career quit pretty quickly. We don't have to go into that right now. So, if LeBron James wins this year, wins a Finals MVP, where does he land between Jordan, Johnson, and Kobe Bryant? Thoughts?
Well, for starters, it does think I do think it necessitates the Heat keeping this little group together for another year, because I mean if you're talking about 4 straight titles, there's that freakish Celtics team from 59 to 66, and then there's nobody else. 3 has been the capper for every other franchise out there. And for a guy who has been seemingly obsessed with his legacy, since he was in preschool, I think the idea of jumping past what Jordan did, what Magic did, what anybody else other than those 1960 Celtics teams did, I think that's something that would be very appealing to him.
I'd agree. I'd put him ahead of Kobe, and probably just a little bit behind Magic Johnson. Not near Jordan's level yet, but gaining there, obviously, if they win 3 in a row and go for a 4-peat next season. But I think at this point, not quite on Magic Johnson's level.
What if he wins the title this year? Same thing?
Yeah, if he wins the title this year, I'm saying not quite there yet.
And that's because of the titles, or is it because of his play?
It's because of a lot of things, mostly because I don't want to vault somebody ahead when his career is not finished yet. I mean, I really do think it's hard to project. I mean, if they win the title this year and then his knee blows up next year and he never plays again, this is going to be a different conversation, I think.
Yeah.
So I feel like if it ended after a 3-peat, we wouldn't be able to say definitively that he's a, like 4th or 5th best player of all time, caliber player.
What were you saying, Matt?
I think the only way that this conversation changes, and it was just alluded to, is if the guy goes through some sort of catastrophic injury. He hasn't shown any propensity for injuries. I mean, even when he does get hurt, he misses like 45 seconds. He's kind of a cyborg. It's incredible. But look at what we're talking about. We're already comparing this guy to some of the greatest players of all time, and he's 29 years old. He might 3-peat before the age of 30. I'm certainly, when you look at the range of all of this, and you look at the fact that he still has what I would say at the least 4 to 5 years of his prime left. We're looking at a Spurs team that who knows exactly when the window's going to close. The Thunder have some major questions. Who knows where the Heat are going to go from here? But you're also talking about a guy who players will make sacrifices to come play alongside. You're hearing already that these guys are willing to take pay cuts to keep this thing moving. Look, we're already talking about a guy who's been to 4 straight finals at the age of 29. Who knows where he's going to be by the end of his career? But just the fact that we're talking about this guy as among the greatest of all time at his age right now, and I think he is the greatest small forward to ever play the game already. I think that just tells the entire story. We need to wait and see where this goes. But right now, the trajectory that he's on is aside from a guy like Bill Russell, is potentially unprecedented. Jordan didn't 3-peat before the age of 30, and then he took a break and played baseball for a couple of years. I don't think LeBron's going to take a break and go play football like everyone wants him to. So I think we need to wait and see what happens throughout the course of his career. But the trajectory he's on right now is pretty incredible, and I'd be shocked if he stays healthy, if he didn't end up in the top 5 of all time, if not top 3, right up there with Bill Russell and Michael Jordan.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
One cautionary thing, though, about trajectories. 6 years ago, Tiger Woods was on a trajectory to blow away the record for major championships in golf. It's 6 years later, and he's still on the same number because his body broke down. So that's the one danger with the trajectory game. Having said that, I don't disagree with that point at all.
His body broke down, but so did his off the court game or off the course game. If you want to look at it that way. So look, you're right. There are other factors that can contribute to the demise of a great athlete. If he avoids those things, and this is a guy who is not only just a brilliant basketball player, but a brilliant businessman. He knows what his brand is about. He's already made it clear he wants to be, the first billion-dollar athlete. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. If something happens along the way that is detrimental to his on-court game, then there's certainly a risk there. But he hasn't shown any tendency toward any of that sort of stuff along the way. Obviously, injuries are a whole different story, but no one wants to see the guy get hurt, so let's cross our fingers.
All right, let's close
this up. Unless that Shane guy doesn't want him to pass up Kobe. I don't know about that, but
maybe if he get injured in his mind or something. So let's close this up with one last thought then. Michael Jordan, I'm not one of the people that feel like he diminished his legacy by sticking around too long. He was an aging player. What did you expect him to do? He wasn't going to be the same guy. LeBron James has the kind of game that can be adapted to old man game. He's already a terrific facilitator. His court vision is like a point guard. Yeah, he's not going to be able to take it to the rack the same way he can now when he's 35, but you're going to tell me that he couldn't his shooting has gotten better and better. His three-point range has improved. You're telling me that he's not going to be able to be a guy who can set his teammates up, the younger guys, shoot some threes, and legitimately continue winning titles into his mid or even late 30s? I think that's fully possible. Let us move on to Gerald Bourguet, going to talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder and whether the clock is ticking on them already. Gerald?
Right, we're gonna take a quick break from our finals preview here and talk about a team that a lot of people were kind of bandwagoning and hoping would make the finals. There are a lot of questions surrounding this team after losing to the Spurs this year. Can Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook coexist? Is the clock ticking? Is Scott Brooks the right man for this job? Will Westbrook leave for free agency if they don't get a title by then? But I think all of these worries are a little premature. In the NBA, the clock is always ticking, and you're always one injury away from, falling short. And we've seen that twice with the Thunder now. They missed Ibaka for the first 2 games of this series, and last year Russell went down with a knee injury. But KD and Russ are both only 25. Ibaka's only 24. How old was Michael Jordan when he won his first title? 27. LeBron, also 27. And they have a lot of young talent around them now that's going to make them a better, more well-rounded team in the future. You've got Steven Adams, who looks like he's going to be the perfect replacement for Kendrick Perkins, finally, when his time is done there. You've got Jeremy Lamb and Andre Roberson, who, they didn't play particularly well this season, but if Scott Brooks gives them a little more minutes, he's already shown that he can develop young talent. And then you've got Reggie Jackson, who the Thunder are going to make it a priority to keep him around, and he's going to be that kind of third scoring option. So, the Spurs, we keep saying this every year, but eventually their time is going to run out with Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili. Eventually their day will be done as, perennial favorites in the West. So if this Thunder team keeps their current core intact, even after the James Harden trade, which I still think is one of the worst trades in NBA history, the Thunder are still going to be a constant threat to make the finals for the next few years.
So you're not worried at all?
I'm a little worried, but I'm not worried as much as everyone else is who's freaking out. This was KD's year. This was his MVP year. You watch his MVP speech and the way that he talks about his teammates, I don't see Russell and KD breaking apart. I honestly don't.
And you don't think Scott Brooks is hurting this team?
I think he is, but not to the degree that people are blowing it up to be. I think you give him one more year, and if they can't get it done next year, then that's when you can start making the Thunder have a Doug Collins, and they need to switch to a Phil Jackson.
Guys, any thoughts there?
I'm wondering what the requirements to be a perfect replacement for Kendrick Perkins are beyond tall, ambulatory.
Enforcement.
I'm at a loss beyond those two.
Pretty much no emotion, and you push people around in the paint. That's his role.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that one earlier. Adams is only younger, more athletic, taller, and cheaper than Perkins, but, other than that, no, he's a terrible replacement.
And he can take a punch better.
Yes.
Matt, you're saying?
I think that while the Thunder, that trio of Westbrook, Durant, and Ibaka is certainly one that you can build any sort of championship caliber team around. They need a few things on the side. They need to bring in some better perimeter defenders. More 3-and-D guys. Guys like Thabo Sefolosha have really declined a lot. They found themselves in situations where their role players weren't hitting shots against the Spurs. You see situations where if Westbrook and Durant don't combine for 70 points, they have a tough time winning games. Look, like I said, you guys have mentioned it. Steven Adams is only 20 years old, and he's already shown some major flashes. Jeremy Lamb, even a couple of times, even in the Spurs series, showed some hope, but he has to improve dramatically defensively. I think Reggie Jackson's actually a little bit of an interesting case. If you read some of his exit interview stuff, he wants to be a starting point guard, and he was adamant about it in their exit interviews. And I think that's a little bit of a concern in their eyes. He's going to want to get paid. He believes that he's a starting point guard in the NBA, and the Oklahoma City Thunder are one of like 2 or 3 franchises, obviously going back to Seattle, that have never paid the luxury tax in their franchise's history. And we've already seen that Clay Bennett isn't exactly willing to spend a whole bunch of money on this team. That was kind of where the Harden trade stemmed from. So I think Presti does have a little bit of a job ahead of him. I think he needs to figure out how he's going to complement those 3 players, because as good as they are, they need help. And even with the Spurs, when the window does close, there are a lot of really good up-and-coming teams in the Western Conference. I mean, look at what Oklahoma City went through in the first 2 rounds. They got taken to 7 games by Memphis. They got taken to 6 games against the Clippers, and that thing really, if the Clippers would not have imploded in Game 5, that could have gone a whole different way. I think that there are some issues in Oklahoma City, but as long as you have those 3 guys, as long as Durant and Westbrook and Ibaka are around and they stay healthy, you're going to have as good a shot as anybody in the league to win titles. And look, they've had awful breaks the last 2 seasons, no pun intended, but they need a little bit more good luck. Perhaps some of these other teams to undergo some of the bad luck that they've been through the last couple of seasons. The Western Conference is going to be a beast going forward, but they have arguably 2 of the top 5 players in the NBA, and most teams would take that any year going into any season. So they've got to bring in some complementary pieces, but they're going to be okay. That seems terrifying.
Yeah, shout out to Jared Brownlee echoing what we were just talking about Steven Adams already that much better than Perk, and Brooks refused to play him more minutes. That's why I just can't stand Scott Brooks. I mean, I don't understand. Their offense is literally throw it to Westbrook or throw it to Durant and, hey, go do something. Like, these are professional defenses you're going up against. You can't just say be more athletic. That's a high school or a college thing, not a professional thing.
There are some things, though, with Scotty Brooks. I think that his in-game adjustments can be really questionable at times. His rotations can be weird. His lineup choices, especially during the regular season, can be weird. But that team is almost always ready to play. As typically as they go on in series, they get better. You got to give him some credit. In the Spurs series, he really actually pulled some big lineup changes, like starting Reggie Jackson, playing Jeremy Lamb when he didn't play at all in the first 2 games. Like, he actually tried to make some moves, but I think that I'm going to echo the sentiment that if he doesn't get the job done, at least to their expectations. Perhaps next year or the year after that, he's going to be on thin ice if he isn't already.
All right.
See, I think what Brooks needs to do is just confess.
He knows where the bodies are?
Tell everybody where the bodies are, and that way Perkins and Cephalosha don't have any leverage.
Well, see, I think that's the thing. I think Kendrick Perkins knows where the bodies are, and he's blackmailing him.
Exactly. I think Cephalosha's in on it, too. I can't think of any other reason why either of those guys are starters.
Or why Derek Fisher is playing crunch time minutes.
I was just going to say, Derek Fisher and his massive Ed Hockley biceps are in there taking care of business.
And by the way, I got to say that the Manu Ginobili 3 at the end of Game 6, or near the end of Game 6, where Duncan hip-checked the crap out of Derek Fisher, I think that in talking to Spurs fans, I think that alleviated all of the hatred that has been building up against that guy over the last decade, ever since Point 4, a decade ago. I think everyone can forget about it now and send that guy on his way with a flailing hip check by Tim Duncan to the floor. I think that was a pretty apropos way for that series to kind of end.
I thought he was going to spin like a top straight into the atmosphere, but that didn't happen, unfortunately. All right, let us move on to our third segment. It is Phil Watson, and we're going to talk about Gregg Popovich and the Mount Rushmore of NBA coaches. Take it away, Phil.
When the whole Mount Rushmore thing happened earlier this season with LeBron, I thought it was one of the more ridiculous discussions we had. Everything for about a month had to be a Mount Rushmore. So I want to be the one responsible for bringing that back. Because I need more ridiculousness in my life. But I got to thinking about Gregg Popovich a little bit, and I heard some of the comments from Tim Duncan saying that, his legacy will be fine, he'll be remembered just fine. And then I started thinking about, if I was going to pick 4 coaches out of the history of professional basketball to put on that mountain, who would they be? And I did, after some deliberation, come up with my 4. Red Auerbach, Phil Jackson, Popovich is on there as far as I'm concerned, and the 4th one is the surprise, Alex Hannum. Only guy to win championships with 3 different franchises and in 2 different leagues. I think you got to give some respect to that.
The only thing I don't like about, I wasn't really looking into ABA stuff as much, but his NBA resume is not strong. 53% winning percentage in the regular season, 57% in the playoffs. The 3 championships is nice, but you've still got Jackson, Auerbach, Kundla. Is that how you say his name? Kundla? You were alive in the 40s. What was it? Kundla? And,
I think it's Kundla. And no, I wasn't. Shut up.
And then of course, Pat Riley. So, that is a stretch, but, I respect the idea that he did it with different teams instead of a guy like Popovich who,
part of the reason his record,
good luck.
His regular season record is what it is. They traded Wilt Chamberlain out from under him in San Francisco, and that tanked a full season. He took over the just after expansion Rockets when they were still in San Diego. That couldn't have been good for his record. And some of the Hawks teams that he had early on were pretty bad too. But he was the one coach who beat the Celtics during Russell's career. He's the only one who did it during Bill Russell's career.
Yeah, he went from 35-45 record with the San Francisco Warriors in 65-66 to 68-13 with the Philadelphia squad in 66-67.
Yeah, the 76ers.
Yeah.
That was the Wilt Chamberlain led the league in assist year. No, it's the year before that. That was set the win record year. The 67-68 was lead the league in assists. It's hard to follow his checklist. Win the title, okay, now I want to lead the league in assists, okay. On the one hand, it's scary to be good enough to do that. On the other hand, really, why just win some damn games in the playoffs?
Right.
But yeah, that's my argument for Hannum. Is 3 titles with 3 different teams across 2 different leagues. I mean, he won a title with Bob Pettit, he won a title with Wilt Chamberlain, and he won a title in the ABA when he was supposed to have Rick Barry and didn't have him.
So where does Pat Riley fall? Does he fall 5th for you?
He falls probably 5th.
Okay.
Another interesting little tidbit here about Hannum. Started coaching at the age of 33. Won the NBA championship as a coach at 34. Retired at 50. So he really could have had a lot longer career had he chose to. Looks like he missed 35 and 36. What was happening in 59, 60s? What was happening in 58 through 60?
For Hannum? For who? Hannum?
Yeah, for Hannum. He was out of the league.
He got fired because he got into a pissing match with his owner.
Won the NBA championship, got fired. Was out of the league for 2 years.
Yeah.
Welcome to the NBA in 1950.
Yeah.
Matt, you got anything to add here?
I just think that the coaching discussion is such a difficult one to have when you consider the different eras. I just think everything was so different. Even going back to the 90s, even the early 2000s. I mean, I'm looking at the tenure that Popovich has bridged here. I mean, this was a team that was dumping into Duncan, 4 down, a post-up offense that lived in the 80s and would beat people 91 to 88. And now they're one of the highest scoring, fastest moving teams in the NBA. I just think it's so difficult to compare coaching jobs in different eras. I mean, and then going back to the Chamberlain and the Russell days, the level of competition wasn't nearly the same as it has been. Obviously, I believe now, and certainly over the last several decades. Certainly when Jordan was in the league. I mean, I just think with the growth of the sport, with the improvement of athletes, just a completely different story altogether these days. And so I just think it's difficult to compare eras. I've been covering Gregg Popovich for the last 3 years and have been around the guy in person for 3 years, and it's been an absolute treat to be around that guy, and even talking to coaches who come into San Antonio who without hesitation call him the best coach ever. And I think that I think you're obviously going to get arguments. You're obviously going to look at guys like Phil Jackson, who have 11 rings. That's a hell of an accomplishment. But then you look at a guy like Popovich. No player-coach duo in the NBA history has more wins than he and Tim Duncan have. The trio of Ginobili, Parker, and Duncan have more playoff wins than any other trio in NBA history. I think he has a ton of these accomplishments on his own. He, has a chance at ring number 5, and if it weren't for a couple of, injuries and kind of strange plays along the way, which happened to everybody, we could be talking a Spurs 6th or 7th title chance coming up. So it's difficult to compare all the eras, and I think that you can even look at a guy like Larry Brown, who he accomplished a lot at different levels of the sport as well. So I think there are a ton of guys you can throw into the conversation. So it's an interesting discussion, but everyone was doing it in such different times that it's virtually impossible to come up with the real answer, I think.
There's only one part of that I have a real issue with, and that's the myth of the level of competition. The level of competition, I'm going to pull a year out of my head. Let's say one of the Russell years, 1966. 9 teams in the league, 10-man rosters.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a talent pool of 90 players. Now, let's compare that to a 25, 26, 27 team league with 13-man rosters, everything has gone exponentially. I don't see where the big difference in level of competition comes from.
I think the one
I think
argument,
athleticism, yes. Level of
and
competition,
that's
I
a
don't
big
buy.
part of it. And I think that the depth in general of these teams, while I certainly get what you're saying. You talk about a smaller number of teams, a smaller pool of players to pick from. So the lower end players are less plentiful at that point. But I think the level of athleticism has just exploded. The development of these players, the inclusion of the three-point line, the development and the evolution of the game just in general. While I completely get what you're saying, I just think basketball has evolved and changed to a point where it's much more diverse, both from a personnel standpoint and a style of play and an X's and O's. I think it's infinitely more complicated. I think the game has become something of an intellect sport. And I think you look back at that time and you look at guys like Russell and Chamberlain, who were, those guys absolutely murdered everyone they played against. They completely overmatched them. You talked about the fact that Wilt Chamberlain can go out and lead the league in assists, and he had his crazy triple-double years where literally he could do whatever he wanted on the floor. And I don't think that would be the case today. I don't even think it would be close.
No, there's definitely been an evolution. I'm not arguing that point.
Right.
My argument is that I think the line between level of competition and depth of athleticism gets blurred there. I don't see where the playing field was unlevel, because there are outliers in every era.
Sure.
LeBron James is certainly an athletic outlier, even in the most athletic age of professional basketball. So
I've never seen anyone like Russell Westbrook.
No.
The guys
90 miles an hour under control.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable to watch. But no, I certainly understand what you're saying.
Yeah, okay.
Let me throw one last thing in here before we move on. And we're talking about a totally different era as far as the world is concerned as well.
Right.
These guys were doing things like going off to war, like getting jobs because they couldn't afford to play basketball for a living. So it's very possible that a lot of the less fortunate people that weren't able to make it into the league but could have been absolute ballers just couldn't get into the league. It wasn't as easy as it is today to get noticed and to get picked up and to be somebody.
And I was just going to say real quick, just to kind of piggyback on that, you can also include the racial barriers involved. You can bring into that stuff into the conversation. There's just so much more opportunity for so many more people to get where they want to be these days. I think we've beaten this to death, I think, but I think that all points are valid for sure.
All right, let us move on to the next portion. We're going to ask Matt a couple of questions. We're going to keep this moving on so we can get into our last couple segments here. My question for you, Matt, this Spurs team, regardless of what happens in this finals, where do they land among the best teams in the modern era?
I think they're actually pretty interesting. When we try to compare teams to the Bulls or whoever, the Celtics of the past or the Lakers of the past, I think we tend to look at these stretches of just a handful of years where they dominate the league or they establish these dynasties. You look at the post-Jordan NBA, the first team that kind of popped up was the Kobe, Shaq Lakers when they went on their run, and then kind of broke it apart. The Lakers went on another one about a half a decade or a little bit more than a half a decade later. Then you look at a team like the Heat right now who are in their fourth consecutive finals, and you have to call them, I hate the dynasty conversation, but this is certainly a team that is dominated in recent memory, just like the Lakers did in the early 2000s and then the late 2000s. The Spurs haven't won back-to-back titles, and I do think, I am of the belief that is an accomplishment that a lot of people tie into that word dynasty. I think it's an accomplishment that when you look back in time, you look at some of the great teams ever, that they were able to accomplish that. But at the same time, there really hasn't been a team that's sustained this sort of longevity or this sort of success over such a long period of time. I mean, they've already, the record, what is it now, 15 consecutive 50-plus win seasons. I've already talked about the win totals between Duncan and Popovich and these guys. So, I think it's a little bit of a different. They've done it in a little bit of a different way. I think that getting back to another finals is important. I think if you're starting to look at this franchise in the same light, look, if Duncan gets number 5, he's tied Kobe. He's one closer to Jordan. And I'm not someone who thinks he's done this year, whether they retire or not, or whether they win or not. And I think we might be getting into that here shortly. But I think that this has to go down as one of the greatest teams of all time for everything they've managed to accomplish over a 17-year period. You never see these teams, keep these trios together anymore. You never see coaches stay in one spot this long. I think Popovich has 4 more years to go to catch Jerry Sloan. I believe he was in Utah for 21 straight years. But it's in a little bit of a different style. They never won the back-to-back. I do think that that's something of a mark on their legacy that I don't believe is over yet. But at the same time, when you take into account all the years that they've sustained this success, I think they have to go down as one of the greatest teams of all time.
Phil, go ahead with your question.
How strange is it during this amazing run that the Spurs have had, and it is an amazing run. I think what makes it hard to compare is that it's unprecedented in just about any sport. They're getting into New York Yankees, the 40s and 50s territory. But how strange is it that this is the first time they've gone to the finals in consecutive years? And the first time they've made the finals in an even-numbered year. That throws my whole mojo off.
Right. They were known as the odd-year champions. Yeah, I think it is weird. It is weird. You look back at everything that those teams in the early 2000s that were dominant. I mean, and I think that you also have to look at certain aspects like the Derek Fisher shot, the .4 in 2004, overshadowed one of the greatest playoff shots in NBA history, and Tim Duncan falling over from the top of the key and banking it in to take the lead over Shaq. Like, people don't even think about that shot, and they don't think about the fact that, look, if the Spurs go on to beat the Lakers, they have a great shot of beating the Pistons. You look in 2006, Manu Ginobili fouling Dirk at the end of Game 7 to allow the Mavericks to tie the game and then go on and win the game and take the series. I think that they had a great shot to beat the Heat that year. There are certain elements, hell, last year they had a great shot to win it. And a lot of people will argue they should have won it in Game 6. So, there have been, look, after 1999, the 2000 playoffs, Tim Duncan tears his meniscus right like a couple of games before the playoffs begin. So there have been these weird kind of circumstances that have popped up along the way that have stopped them from getting to those points. But look, like I said, that stuff happens to everybody. We just finished talking about the Thunder and their bad luck. But yeah, it's weird to see them back in the finals for a second consecutive year. And again, it was weird last year seeing them make a finals and not win it. They were previously undefeated in all of their finals appearances. So, it's interesting to see them now and to see them up close all season long because they were pissed off. They were not happy about the way things happened last year. This whole season has been about that. It has been about preparing themselves to get back to that point. And, it's a lot of fun to see them get back to that point because in Miami for Game 7, I was walking down the hall as Tim Duncan was going to the podium, and I've never seen a more dejected human being in my life. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but there, and I couldn't blame him, and it's really just kind of good to see these guys get back, because I know it's kind of overblown and people always talk about it, but these are really good guys, and they're easy to be happy for in terms of getting back to this place to get another shot. Plus, it's against arguably the best team in the league and the best team of the last 3 or 4 years. So my girlfriend, who's a Dallas Mavericks fan, will say that the Mavericks were the better team in 2011, which they were. But anyway, it's very cool to see them back in this spot.
Gerald, go ahead.
All right, so you kind of alluded to this already, but let's say that the Spurs win it all. This is the worst case scenario that Spurs fans don't want to think about yet. What does life look like if Duncan and Popovich and maybe even Manu Ginobili just kind of ride off into the sunset together?
Well, and I think, I think it would be really interesting if the Spurs were able to win it and these guys decide to ride off into the sunset, so to speak, kind of like David Robinson did when the Spurs won in 2003. I think it would be a really interesting emotional reaction from Spurs fans. On one hand, you get another title, what is it now, 7 years after their last one and 16 years from their first one. I think everyone would be ecstatic about that, and then the idea of losing one of the greatest players in the history of the game, Manu Ginobili, arguably the city's most beloved player in franchise history, and that's not a joke. That guy is, I've never seen someone so well received in San Antonio as Manu Ginobili, which made it really interesting after last year's finals when it seemed like half the fan base wanted him gone. But I don't know, man. I think it would be a really interesting reaction. But going forward, the Spurs have an incredible cap situation. It's absolutely pristine. They're going to more than likely extend Kawhi Leonard by the October 31st extension deadline going into next season, and I'm betting he's going to be up over 8 figures. Thiago Splitter is in tow for the next 3 years. When you look ahead, Kawhi Leonard and Thiago Splitter are the only guys that are going to be under contract after next season. Maybe Corey Joseph as well, but they're going to have tons of cap room going forward. They've got draft picks that they've stashed overseas that are going to be coming over in the next couple of years. None of them are projected to necessarily be stars, but certainly starters or very good role players. So they're going to have a lot of complementary or supplemental pieces along the way. And you never know. I actually think Gregg Popovich, when Duncan and Manu walk, I think Manu would be the one who is more likely to leave. I think Duncan is just kind of on cruise mode right now. He's incredible. He's the last one. He's the first one in the gym every day. He's the last one to leave. And that's not like an exaggeration. He literally is. He still loves doing this. So even recently talking to R.C. Buford a little bit off the record, just casually, we kind of brought up, what's going to happen when these guys are gone, and he just kind of goes, we're not even thinking about that right now. We don't want to think about that. We don't think that they're necessarily done when this contract is over. I wouldn't be surprised if Duncan opts out of his player option next season and takes another pay cut to potentially bring in more help to go after it again. Look, I think that there's a really competitive side to these guys that people don't necessarily, that people don't necessarily see. And I think that they say they don't care about the legacy, but I think the fact that they haven't won back-to-back titles, I think that that's probably something that might be on their mind a little bit. Obviously, they got to get to a fifth one first, and it's going to be a hell of a chore to do that. But the future beyond Duncan and Ginobili is a terrifying one, but it's one the Spurs are set up for very nicely. They're going to have a bunch of options. Who knows if they pan out or what happens exactly? But yeah, if you lose a guy like Duncan, who's top 10 player of all time, if not getting close to top 5, certainly when you lose a guy like that and a guy like Manu Ginobili, who's also going to be a Hall of Famer, it's terrifying. But they've set themselves up probably as well as they possibly can.
Excellent. All right, let us move on to our next segment here. We're going to fill in the blank. Now, usually we'd like to spend a little bit more time here, but we're running a little bit short or a little bit long, depending on what perspective you're looking at here. So, fill in the blank, just a quick phrase. What comes to mind? Kevin Durant as the lone unanimous first-team All-NBA player is what, Phil?
Surprising.
Matt?
Abso-freaking-lutely ridiculous. Is that...
Lots
is that
of dashes. Lots of dashes.
Yeah.
Gerald?
Odd.
Yeah. I didn't go in to look at the voting to see exactly who didn't put LeBron James in there.
Sheridan.
But, okay, and he had talked about it,
Sheridan.
ahead of time that he was going to be doing that, right?
Right.
It just seems petty. Like, even if you hate LeBron James with a passion, he's one of the...
No, but that's kind of him. That's kind of Sheridan's weird thing. He didn't put Popovich in his Coach of the Year voting. He didn't put. Now we see that he's the only one that didn't put LeBron James as his first team. It's weird. I don't want to put any labels on a guy, but yeah, we'll put it that way. It's really weird.
That's like an Andy Kaufman kind of promotional tool, I think, to pump up website hits. But we'll move on.
Yeah.
Tony Parker's ankle injury will be blank. Phil.
Bigger than we want to think.
Matt.
Not as big as you want to think.
Gerald.
X Factor.
I'm going with non-factor. He's had, plenty of time to sit and rest. I just think that even if it hurts him, he's going to be out there. He's been a champion 3 times. Is that right?
Yes.
And
Finals MVP in 2007 as well.
He knows how to play through pain. It's not broken. I mean, if it's going to be just uncomfortable, he'll be fine.
You want to hear real quick? You want to hear a little bit of an interesting stat? The Spurs have been better in terms of net rating, not only in the postseason but throughout the regular season with Tony Parker off the court.
We could talk the whole show about something like that.
Yeah.
All right. The NBA Finals will be decided by blank. Phil.
Wow. Role players.
Matt.
Manu Ginobili.
Gerald.
Ginobili versus Wade.
I was gonna go with paint presence personally, but all those are quite wonderful. All right, let's move on to one word, which pretty much is what we just played because we didn't have time to really elaborate. But we'll do a second round basically. Just the first word that comes to mind when you hear Manu Ginobili. Phil.
Insane.
Matt.
God, I guess wild card is 2 words. Wild card, 1 word.
Wild dash card.
Wild dash card.
Gerald.
Better.
Me, I go with Hall of Famer.
That's 3 words.
Hyphenated.
Yeah.
Okay.
LeBron's not 1, not 2, not 3 speech. Phil?
1 word?
One
word. I'm going to mash these 2 together. Still a bad idea.
We're really bad with this 1 word thing.
Yeah. Matt, what do you got?
Ridiculous.
Gerald?
See that?
Jeopardized, because in Jeopardy is 2 words.
How about psychic?
He went to 7 or 8, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think he stopped at 7. That's not.
Oh, well, that makes it okay. If he'd gone to 8, no, we're totally off the board with this now.
All right, last one. The 2014 NBA Finals MVP. Phil?
James.
Matt?
Ooh, this is giving the prediction away, essentially, right?
Uh,
Man, Tim Duncan.
And Gerald.
Tim Duncan also.
Wow, okay. I'm with James on this one. All right, our very last segment, we're going to play over-under. I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios. You tell me whether you think it's over or under. As of right now, Phil Watson, 1-0, undefeated in this game. He hasn't even missed a question. 3 for 3 last week. Gerald was 2 for 3, not bad, and our guest was 2 for 3. Matt, we'll see if you can be the very first guest drinking beer on our program and winning at this game. Let's do it. Number 1, Tim Duncan has over or under 1,000 more career playoff points than LeBron James. Phil.
Over.
Matt.
Under.
Gerald.
Over.
Matt takes the lead. The answer is under. Tim Duncan only has 633 more points in the playoffs than LeBron James has, despite playing 76 more games.
He scores a lot. He scores a lot less than a lot of people think that he does. I believe.
Tynan. Next up, the Spurs have won the conference championships, NBA now, over or under 2 more times than the Miami Heat have won their conference championship. Phil.
2 or more?
2
2 is the number.
2 is the number.
More than 2 is what you're asking?
Over or under 2 times more
than the Heat. Under.
Matt?
Under.
Gerald?
Under.
It is under. They have only won 1 more conference championship than the Miami Heat. The Spurs have had 5, the Heat 4. Last one. Gregg Popovich's win-loss percentage in the playoffs, over or under 61%.
Under.
Matt.
Over.
Gerald.
Oh, boy. I'm going to go under. No, over.
Okay, which one?
Over.
Over. It is over. 62%. 145 and 89 is his record. So just so we
I was
all
going to
know,
go of under.
right after I pumped up Watson and his perfect start, he goes 1 for 3. Thanks a lot for that.
Hey,
Matt comes
it's like
in
talking about how good a free throw shooter is when he's at the line.
Exactly. Matt comes in and wins the game, and that is our show for today. This was the 19th episode of Hoops Habit Hangout. Hopefully 100 episodes down the line we can come back and laugh about all this junk. Thank you again to Matt Tynan of the True Hoop Network. We appreciate it. Hopefully you'll come back sometime. For Phil, Gerald, and myself, we are out of here. See you next week. We will be back on Thursday, most likely next week, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern. Come check us out at hoopshabit.com, open 24/7.